There are always. That was one of the tech issues to deal with, so thank you.
Obviously, I was not paying as much attention as I should have when she sat down. I am just so excited and honored to be here with you today. I bring you greetings from our state of character, Reverend Dr. Dave Herbert Nelson, also from Reverend Dr. Diane Moffitt, who is the president of the Presbyterian Mission Agency, and as well as from the office that I direct. Actually, there are two offices. We have the office designed to take another position. So we decided that since we are the two advocacy wings of the denomination, to merge the two together. So I now direct both offices. So I bring you greetings from my staff there. And also we are a resource for you as you continue to go forth on how to be a Matthew 25 Presbyterian congregation. We would love to do workshops for you. We have a staff that is just excellent. And I'm going to talk more about the staff positions during the workshop and how we do advocacy and how that translates within confines of the local congregation. And I also bring you greetings from my family, my wife, Shanita, who is home with our two teenagers. We have a 17-year-old daughter who knows everything in the world. And she's been an expert in this since she was 12. And so, we have a lot of expertise in our house. But she had to work today, so they could not come. And my son, James, who is 16 and very much of an introvert. So if he were here today, he would be all the way in the corner. But I'm just blessed to be here with you today for big events. We talk about ways in which Matthew 25 impacts the life of our denomination, our mid-councils, synods and presbyteries, and especially the life of local congregations. What does it mean to be a Matthew 25 church? And how is the Spirit moving today to move us in new directions, to be a church that is reformed, but always being reformed? And I've got to say, I pastored for 25 consecutive years in Virginia and then also in North Carolina. And the reputation of the church is that we don't like change. Things are nice just the way they are, Pastor. Thank you very much for your vision and insight. But haven't we changed? We have proved to be much more young. And I have not met a church that missed a worship service. That when they went from having the actual physical presence to, or again, they did the virtual presence, that they really adapted. And now we have seniors up, and not to be in ages, but 80 and 90-year-olds who say, where is my iPad? My church service is on. It's a blessing, and it really is. In the midst of a dreaded pandemic, which has ravaged the world, I do think that the church will come out with more resources and more opportunities wherein boundaries, physical boundaries, no longer play the role that they used to. You can be a member of your home church. And I know when I pastored in Durham, individuals did not want their children's names taken off the church roll. I know they live in California now, but I want their name on the church roll, so that's no longer a fact. And I think that it's really, we can come out of this doing God's will in some new and exciting ways as the Spirit is moving us. I'm really coming back home, to be honest with you. I am a member of New Hope Presbyterian in North Carolina, Raleigh, Durham area. But I pastored in Martinsville, Virginia. My first call was in Martinsville, and I was a member of Peaks Presbyterian. As a matter of fact, I was on the governing board for Camp Massanetta for a term, and I served as the summer program director for one summer. When they had the 1-week camp that week, I was the director for that summer. And that was the best week camp I've ever been to. And so I have a real love for Massanetta. I've been here on numerous occasions. As a matter of fact, each January, I bring my staff here. We have our staff retreat here at the lodge. And so we missed last year, obviously, but we already have our reservation for next January. So it's just it's an opportunity for me to come home. And I am thankful for your presbyter and for Pastor Nancy for the graciousness of the invite here. Really have felt welcome. I'm going to talk hopefully for about 25 minutes. So I'm going to give you heads up. Please be ready to engage with one another. That's really where we have an opportunity to talk and to expound upon some of the things that you hear, but also some of the things in which you want to talk about as it relates to your congregation, to your presbytery. So I'm giving you a heads up now. I am, again, I've pastored for 25 years, so I can keep talking if need be. Especially now that I don't have to preach every Sunday. So I've got a whole lot of things I didn't say in those 25 years. The theme of Big Event is, when did we see? I'm going to take these off. I see better sometimes without them. You notice I couldn't make up my mind whether to keep my glasses on during communion. So in Matthew 25:37, that is the question. When did we see? And Jesus, in the parable, as Reverend Gibbon mentioned, that he talks about the final judgment, where there's a separation between the goats and the sheep, one on the right, one on the left, and told them basically, to those on the right side, which is the good side, but now you also are on the good side. Be fair, you don't want to label you as the goats, okay? But he said, they asked him, told him, when you come to the place prepared for you for what I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. A stranger, you welcomed me. I was sick and in prison, and you came to me, naked, and you clothed me. And they wanted to know, when. When did we see you as such? And he told them, when you did it for the least of these, our brothers and our sisters, you did it for me. This is a call from our Lord and Savior for a connection of discipleship. Jesus connects us to each other through a connection to him. He connects faithfulness to service to others. And he connects himself to those in need as he connects ministering to others to ministry to himself. Therefore, I would contend the answer to the question, when did we see you? When do we see you? We see Jesus when we see each other. The question, when did you see you, is an intimate one. For to see someone is to acknowledge their presence, to publicly affirm that they have worth, that they are a person of value as a child of God. To see someone indicates that we see the entire person, their needs, their desires, their fears, sorrows, faults, and their virtues. We in this country, we greet one another by asking, how are you? In words quickly stated, often without expression, not really waiting for, or really at times wanting a response. And the one who is asked, how are you, says without hesitation, I'm fine. This abbreviated greeting allows us to portray an image of interest in one's well-being, but rarely is that the intent. It's an opportunity for us to be polite, but we simply do not have the time to fully engage one another. We're too busy, too stressed. We have too many things to do without becoming embroiled in listening to someone tell us about their problem. We have problems of our own. And that's what led the enslaved to sing, nobody knows the trouble I'm seeing. Nobody knows but Jesus. And even more than that, there are certain people we instinctively do not wish to encounter or to engage with. You know who they are. As children of God, as human beings, we have lost our connection to one another. Many of us have seen that old movie, and I got that statement from The Avengers, when the young Spider-Man would meet in the dilemma. He would say, remember that old movie? And to the older adults, were like, that movie is not that old. So that old movie, Avatar, where the Na'vi greet one another by saying, I see. Ubuntu is Nguni Bantu term, meaning humanity. I am because we are, or I am because you are. The Zulu people offer greetings with the word Sawubona, I see. They take the word seriously as they maintain eye contact as the other person responds with Yebo Sawubona, I see you, see me. And some add Chikobona, I exist for you. This exchange demands a high level of attentiveness and symbolizes the importance of directing our full attention to others during the first moment of contact, to observe the manner in which they respond, to look for evidence as to how they are really doing, to read body language and be willing to engage if needed. The Zulu believe that human beings exist only if others see and accept them. It's a way to grant visibility, and it calls us to understand others without prejudice, to be sensitive to needs, and to value the individual. It is a call to integrate others into our community and to build trust in one another. Evidence of intimate care is seen that when someone in this community commits an infraction against the community, this person is called to the center of the village and is surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors. They don't chastise or issue charges of misconduct, but for 2 days, they go to the person and greet them. They repeat to him his value to the community, that he has merit, that they are not complete without him. This is a tremendous gift that we too can offer to one another. To see our full presence, to be aware that the lives of others have value and worth, to take the time to share moments together, making ourselves vulnerable to each other, to engage, to listen, to be. However, it can be surmised that we have the opposite response. Over the course of human history, we have divided ourselves into camps of discontent. We allow superficial barriers of race, class, sexual identity, gender, nationality, and even age to determine who is acceptable and who is not. Those we see oftentimes are those who are invisible, and we do not really see them. And if we cannot see someone, they are invisible, and invisible people do not exist. Invisible people are all around us: African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans, the poor, women, and even children. We don't want to think that we don't see people, but in reality, we go by them each day without ever paying attention. And they don't have to be far away. We can fail to see the people right next to us. We lived this way for so long that we began to take one another for granted, feeling that our lives are lived doing the same old thing day in and day out. Ralph Ellison's 1952 book, Invisible Man, he wrote, and I quote him, "I am a man of substance, of flesh and blood, fiber and liquids. And I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible. Understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in a circus sideshow, it is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors, hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me." End quote. As Christians, clergy, laity, people of faith, it is our calling to see people. That is the primary impetus of Matthew 25. To see those not seen by others or who are condemned for their plight in life. Matthew 25 seeks to help us to highlight those the world refuses to acknowledge. Jesus came for those cursed by the burden of their invisibility. Those who are hungry, those who are thirsty, the sick and the imprisoned, the stranger from whom there is no welcome. Jesus sees them, and he charges us to see them as well. That in our journey of faith, when we are encountered by the Lord of Lords, he opens our eyes so that we might see him, his presence in our lives, and then might truly see one another. He constantly talked about those who have been gifted with the ability to see, that those who desire to see, they do not see, they are blind. But those who have a desire through faith to see, that he opens our eyes. We each must ask ourselves, who do we see? Do we see the 2 million incarcerated within our prison walls so that we might feel safe? But in reality, our prisons are filled with men and women and children locked behind walls because of drug addiction, mental illness, or being black and brown. Jesus said, "I was in prison and you visited me." On the border between Mexico and South Texas, there are 10,000 migrants who have fled their home country seeking refuge in the United States. Last night, they slept under a bridge awaiting word. The twist is that they're not citizens of Mexico Central or Latin America, but the island nation of Haiti. 10,000 souls seeking solace in the land, the free and the home of the brave. How should we respond? Do we see them? Jesus said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Deaths from COVID are rising to numbers not seen since before vaccines were developed. 70% of American adults have been vaccinated. Of the rising number of deaths, the vast percentage are unvaccinated, people refusing to take the vaccine. Many claiming that wearing a mask is an infringement on their freedom. Across the world, there are countries where the percentages are below 5% of who can receive the vaccine and who are praying for greater availability. I was sick, and you came to me. To be a Matthew 25 Presbyterian is to express our common faith by addressing its three components: systemic racism, systemic poverty, and congregational vitality. The issue of systemic racism within the confines of Shenandoah Presbyterian would appear to be less problematic due to an absence of racial diversity. According to Data USA, Shenandoah, Virginia has a population of 303,000 people, from which 93% are white, almost 5% Hispanic, and 1.5% Black. But when you expand to the entire state, Virginia is 67.63% white, almost 20% Black, and 6.5% Hispanic. 1 in every 5 Virginians is Black. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The United States is experiencing the demographic changes social scientists predicted will occur as there are major shifts in the racial makeup of the country. According to Brookings, racial diversification increased at a more rapid rate than previously anticipated. Remarkable growth has been witnessed in racial ethnic demographics. According to Pew Research, the U.S. Census Bureau and National Bureau of Economic Research, the racial diversity in the United States will be completely reversed in less than 40 years. In 1980, Blacks constituted 11.5% of the American population. By 2000, the percentage had risen to 12.1%. In 2019, there were 46.8 million Black people, a high of 14%. Between 2004 and 2014, the Black population grew by 21%. In 2021, 14% of the US population is Black, 6% are non-Hispanic white, 18% Hispanic, 7% Asian American, and 2% American Indian or Alaskan Native. Pre-COVID predictions are that by 2060, Blacks will represent 17.9% of the population. Of the 8% who define themselves as biracial, most are from a union of Black and white parents, and 5% define themselves as Black Hispanic. Projections are that American racial diversity will continue to increase in the coming decades. Between 2000 and 2010, the Hispanic community's total birth rate of infants outnumbered the birth of white babies. The Bureau reported that July 1st, 2015 triggered a demographic shift when a slight majority of children born were of color. And for the first time, most preschool students were of color. And in 2018, Pew did a study, post-millennials, and it revealed that almost half of 6 to 21-year-olds were Hispanic, African American, or Asian. They successfully integrated the American public school system to the degree that there is no longer a white majority. A regional survey of Southern and Western schools revealed that not one racial ethnic demographic dominated. Western schools are 40% white, 40% Hispanic, 9% Asian, 5% Black, and 7% others. Now, church, Jesus is informing us that this is not bad news. This is good news. The world as we know it is not coming to an end. It is just expanding and diversifying. It's gaining more racial vitality. Racial diversity will be a non-issue for our children and grandchildren who are going to live each day as their world will be radically more racially diverse than ever before. And they will have to have the skills and ability to not allow it to be a disrupting factor, as it has been throughout American history. We must prepare the way for this reality by destroying the racial divisiveness we inherited so that it won't manifest and corrupt their lives. They deserve a better world, and we can help to give it to them by being candid and sharing our own racial experience growing up and how race influenced our lives and affected our relationships. We must talk about how the country has changed for the better, but also acknowledge that there is still much to be done and challenge the sin of white supremacy wherever it manifests itself. Back in the summer of 1983, I served as the summer program director for Shenandoah Presbyterian's campus ministry at Camp Patty Run in Sark Tannery up near Strasburg, Virginia. It was one of my most enjoyable and meaningful spiritual experiences in camp life. As a matter of fact, I received my call while working at camp. A local family, a husband and wife, unfortunately I forget their name, they served as the camp managers and did all of the cooking at the camp. I still remember the first conversation that the wife, again, my apologies for not remembering her name, she said, well, we need to sit down and talk about the camp menu. This was before camp had started. So we sat down and had a very great conversation and talked about hamburgers and hot dogs and hobos for the cookouts and planning trips and how we would arrange all of that. And she asked me an interesting question. She says, well, do you allow them to eat cake? I said, yeah, I like cake. She says, well, the former program director didn't want too many sweets. I said, oh, well, you can go ahead and overdose us. Cupcakes. I think that's an added value to camp. And at the end of the conversation, she said to me, and she got kind of serious, and she said, well, you know, I need to share something with you that I hope you don't take offense at. She says, you know, when you travel around here, you need to be careful. You need to be careful where you go, and especially what stores you go into. Some of these small stores, not all of the people in those stores, they like colored people. And I was surprised by what she said, but I was also appreciative. Not a threat. She was simply sharing with me the do's and don'ts of the community in which she lived. And I will say to you that I took her advice. There were certain schools I did not go to. This is really where we are today. There are certain places where people of color are still not welcome in America. And we have to understand that we are the ones, as people of faith, who are called to challenge the legacy of white supremacy in America. As we are gathered here, there are individuals who are gathering in Washington, D.C. right now in order to what's called the January 6th rally, in order to support those who participated in the insurrection, and I intentionally use that word, against the Capitol on January 6th. But there are still those who judge me based on what they see on the exterior before they even take a chance to get to know me. And even in a community such as this, we're going to hear things that bother us. And oftentimes we will let it go. But my challenge to you today, and I think the challenge of Jesus, is to say something. Just say something. We do not grow until we are truly challenged. And the beauty of the church is that people know each other. And Pastor Nancy and I were talking earlier about oftentimes the ones who have the most impact on people's behavior and attitudes are the ones who sit next to them in the pews. They expect certain statements. I think you said that yesterday, certain statements from the pastor from the session. But when you challenge what we would consider to be racist beliefs and behaviors, that's when we really make the difference. An immediate and pressing concern for the Valley is the issue of systemic poverty. In the Shenandoah Valley, the most common racial or ethnic group living below the poverty line is white Americans. According to scholars H.B. Rosenfeld and H. Puritan, I quote them, in the Hebrew Bible, there are instructions to care for the poor and to be compassionate toward them. However, in wisdom literature, there's also criticism of the poor, depicting them as lazy. The Torah obligates the individual Jew to support the poor through tithes and from the produce of the fields, giving charity and free loans, but does not advocate establishing public funds for the relief of the poor. Rabbinic literature from after the destruction of the Second Temple shows that the rabbis advocated community responsibility to helping the poor. It shows compassion towards the poor and encourages the Jews to support them through charity. They amended religious laws in order to enable the poor to have more to consume. This seems to be a change from the way the rabbis related to the poor prior to the destruction, as is depicted by the New Testament. Examination of actions attributed to sages from before the destruction shows that the rabbis related positively primarily towards the poor, who were sons of good citizens. The other poor were others and were left to charity and tithes. After the destruction, all poor are ours, sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. End quote. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that about 13% of the 300,000 people who live in the central Shenandoah Valley fall below the federal poverty level. But many other families are struggling in a way that federal authorities can't easily track, working and struggling day to day to make ends meet. United Way refers to them as ALICE, assets limited, income constrained, employed. Its report stated that, quote, the population really is hidden because it's people that are working. And I think we make the assumption sometimes that people that are working might not be struggling, or that people who are struggling do not have full-time jobs. That's not always the case. United Way's report found that 39% of households in Harrisonburg are ALICE, combined with families that fall below the poverty level. An estimated 65% of homes in the city are struggling, the third worst in the state. Presbyterians believe that government is God's agent when it comes to the providential care of people. We believe that creation is entrusted to our care. We will be good stewards of the environment and the resources of the environment. And a crucial part of our worship and mission is to stand together for the common good. This presbytery has responded tremendously. Our ministries will support food banks throughout the region. And we must acknowledge that the problem is too big for any coalition of churches to solve. We must also pursue state and federal advocacy to work to challenge unjust laws which imprison people in poverty. Advocacy is a part of Christian discipleship. We eradicate systemic racism by advocating and acting to break down the systems, practices, and thinking that underlie discrimination, bias, prejudice, and oppression for people of color. We must strive to eradicate systemic poverty by working to change laws, policies, plans, and structures in our society that perpetuate economic exploitation of people who are impoverished. There are structures in our society that all but guarantee that people living in poverty will stay that way. To eradicate the economic exploitation of people who are poor through laws, policies, practices, and systems that perpetuate their impoverished status must be applied. We must communicate with our legislators to increase SNAP benefits, to increase the amount allotted in food stamps. A living wage must be paid nationwide so that people can earn enough to adequately feed and clothe their children. What if, rather than the defining the Matthew 25 command as being comprised of three components, we defined it as 3 in 1. Sounds familiar. Rather than saying that we're striving to build congregational vitality, eliminate systemic racism, and eradicate systemic poverty, we declared that we build congregational vitality by eliminating systemic racism and eradicating systemic poverty. That these are the keys to kingdom. That when we want an active church, we want a vital church, that we have as a part of our ministry the combating of racism and also poverty, that they go hand in hand. Many of us have histories in the life of this church. The Presbyterian Church is one of the most generous churches that exists. We are always, whenever I go across the country, churches are engaging with the community. Churches are feeding people. Churches are even housing people. But we also must do advocacy. There's too much need that we cannot do. And the government can do more. Healthcare, universal healthcare, should be the right of every person living in this country and all around the world. The right to cast your vote should be universal in the United States of America. We must challenge anyone who is of barriers. We must challenge those who are given and blessed with positions of leadership. We've got to do a better job of electing people to office, because I realize some of the ones who are in office, Chaplain, you can't ignore this piece of it, should not be there. Some people need to go home with a job. You're called. But more so as people to care, to be people of compassion. And as the chaplain said, people to understand that there's nothing nothing in heaven or on earth that can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. That Jesus said that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and to dare to love one another, even as we love ourselves. Love is the key. But when we have love, we can't have love without justice. You can't say that you care about me and do nothing to change your situation. James still challenges us today that faith without works is indeed dead. Therefore, as we continue to claim ourselves to be a Matthew 25 denomination, to be a Matthew 25 presbytery, to have our congregations, our sessions of go upon, be in Matthew 25 congregations. Let us understand, as it has been said, that the reason that we do these things is because the love of God is within us. And it is just so great that it is bursting forth in order to do works of compassion and justice, in order to change this world, to transform this world into the kingdom of God, in order that that which exists in heaven might be experienced here on earth. So one of the things that I would like to talk to you about, or have you talk to me about, what's going on in your congregation, what are you excited about, what direction would you like to go into as it pertains to Matthew 25. Any questions that you have about anything that I've said? Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm Massanetta, I'm a pastor actually in West Virginia, Shepherdstown, which is also part of this Presbyterian. The question I have for you is the real challenge that I've experienced both in my own self and in conversations with folks who, when you are trying to talk about both systemic poverty and systemic racism, and folks like, at least where I am, would love to talk about poverty as a way to escape talking about racism. So can you talk a little bit about how to make sure we really are holding those two together?
Okay. So how do we address the issues of systemic poverty and systemic racism without people using one against the other? Saying, well, I want to talk about poverty because I don't want to talk about racism. I do think it's a difficult thing. And one of the things that I would say, church culture takes a long time to change. And so I say to pastors, be patient, because you're going to preach the best sermon in your life. People want to be sitting out there looking at their clock. You're what? She's 3 minutes over time. Just a quick aside, when I first got my first call to go to Durham congregation meeting, I talked about my vision for being engaged in the community and justice work. And one of the elders was sitting out front. He waited. I talked about 20, 25 minutes. I said, any questions? He raised his hand. He says, yeah, why didn't we have any flowers this morning? That's all he waited for me to sit up so he can ask why we don't have. So I understand. And I do think one of the ways is that we have to help people to hear both sides of the argument. I think oftentimes we have a problem in this country where we get entrenched in our position, and we really are not good listeners oftentimes. So one of the ways is that I think we have to present the issue both sides in a way that people feel that they're not being attacked, they're not being criticized. You don't want to talk about racism, not being called a racist. But we also have to continue to know and to urge them, just come and let's have an opportunity to talk and to hear your position as others share their position. So one of the things I think we need to do is to help people who are impacted by these issues to come talk to them. I think one of the things that a mistake we oftentimes make, and an easy mistake to do, is that we talk amongst ourselves. And I find that over the course of decades, we've had the same conversation with the same people over 2 decades. And we're struggling to come up with some new solutions. And we're trying to figure out why we don't have solutions. To bring people in who are impacted, because people know what they need. They know what they need. And they really don't need the experts to come and tell them. So one of the ways I think that, again, to quote the chaplain, we've got to do it in a loving way. And also to understand that some people are not going to agree. Some people are not going to change. I mean, they're going to be, again, entrenched in their position, and no matter how you talk. But to make sure that the invitation is issued, and that also that you have advocates in your congregation who are unrelenting and who stand up every Sunday and talk about those issues in a way that can be heard by those who listen. So again, understand the fact that there are going to be people who are going to resist you the whole time. I mean, some people love a good fight and usually go on the wrong side, you know. You know, but they're dug in. And oftentimes, individuals who have influence in the church are going to. I had a professor who would always shut the door when he said something sensitive. He said, because they are trying to get me. People give a lot of money to the church, oftentimes have undue influence, and oftentimes their positions are not always the direction that the church wants to go in. And so you have to push back at them at times. So I think, again, we do everything out of a sense of loving. That, you know, we're going to disagree on this, but I want you to know that I still love you. And we're in this thing together. And also, I would say, don't feel that everything has to occur at the same time. Because sometimes we do try to do too much. And sometimes we push people at a faster rate than they're comfortable with. And again, change takes time. Again, I pastored in Durham for 20 years. And the things I did at the end of my ministry, I was arrested 4 times for civil disobedience by the time I left. If I had done that at the beginning of my ministry, I never would have made 20 years. You know, but they learned who I was and they learned to love me. And so again, the thing is that it takes time to really learn to change in the church and bring it about. But I will also say this, we have allies that I think oftentimes we don't really call upon as much as we should. And I think with issues of justice, our greatest ally are the youth in the church. Young people are invested in justice. You know, when George Floyd was murdered, I watched very carefully the marches that went on around this country, dominated by young people. Dominated by young people. Washington, and of course there was some gray hairs there, but 85% of the folk who hit the street, and many of them were people of faith. And I'm convinced that young people want to see their churches engaged in more justice issues. And if you allow them to be the spokesperson, there's less resistance to young people than there is to the pastor who stands up and says, we're going to address systemic racism today. So I think that the church has got to truly find a way to empower the young people. I know we don't have a lot of young people in our denomination, but we're very typical of every mainline denomination. All of us are struggling to bring young people. But I'm becoming convinced that one of the reasons that they're giving up on the church is because we don't talk enough about justice. That they don't see the presence of the church in the wider community. That they think that we want you to send them to church, to come to church, participate in church, sing in the choir, come to the youth ministry. But they want positions of leadership. And I close by saying, these kids are a different group today. These kids are capable. These kids are at a point, when I was 15, well, we won't talk about that. But they're at a point in their lives when they can handle a lot of responsibility. And so I think that the church needs to be a place where they can identify as a refuge for those who are hungry and in need, and also a place where we advocate for justice. And again, the last thing I'm going to say is that we do an excellent job of charity, but advocacy has got to be part of our ministry. We have got to talk more about justice advocacy and how the church has got to be a voice. Because again, the need is too great. This is just too great. And I appreciate both. I never would criticize a church that's doing charity, because when someone shows up at your door and they're hungry, they need to be fed right now. They need to be fed. It's legitimate for us to do that, to provide backpacks for children, to support food pantries and be engaged. But we also have got to make sure that the system is just, that it really is doing everything that it can to enable people to take care of themselves. Families want to take care of themselves. No one wants a handout. No one wants to have to go to a place where they're given what they know they want to give to their family. So again, I strongly advocate for living wage. I really think we have done ourselves a disservice with the ways in which we have allowed corporations to basically hire people for under 20 hours so that they don't have to give benefits. And you know, McDonald's is an expert with this, and McDonald's gets the excuse, well, you know, we really are for individuals who are under 26 and will start a job. That is not reality. People working at McDonald's, they're working at Burger King because they can't get enough hours and therefore they don't have benefits and not making enough money. And so one of the things that I think we need to do, because we want to be sensitive to small businesses that cannot afford to pay $21 an hour. The government subsidy that, but the business can't pay the total $21 amount that the government kicks in the rest. But people have got to be paid more in this country. To live in New York City, it takes a salary of over $109,000. And $15 an hour is not going to make it in New York City. And in most cities, you can't live even with $15 an hour. It's not enough. It's $30,000 a year. And so we've got to understand that when people don't make enough money to afford the cost of living, it impacts everything in their lives and into a devastating impact, and it increases crime. And so that was a very long answer, and I know I'm off course. Yes.
I have a question for you that might put you on the spot a little bit and that you're not prepared, but do you have a story from your ministry of somebody that changed their mind?
In a positive way? Or
yeah.
I have a lot of negative stories about someone who changed their mind. Yeah, I think, as far as a specific story of an individual, people generally, in my experience as a pastor, don't come up and say, that one sermon changed my mind, but you see people change over time. So I've seen people change. I've seen people come to be, lack of being political, more progressive as far as caring about laws and things along that line. I mean, for me, that's one of the reasons why I love the church. I mean, to see individuals who are committed to ministry, who are trying to grow and be transformed and reformed, and especially in the long term. So yeah, I don't know if I can think of anyone that started in one position, but I can tell you some stories of people got worse. but that's the transforming presence of the Spirit. It really does bring about change. And again, I'm one of those. I mean, when I grew up, the Black community is traditionally pretty homophobic. It's not been an ally in the LGBTQ movement. And even today, many Black clergy are very homophobic. And will tell you, I was part of the Royal Monday movement in North Carolina. A clergy who told me, said, well, I'm not joining because you have gays and lesbians and you make that a part of the platform. And so when I was an undergrad, I did campus ministry, and that experience impacted me. And I worked with a pastor, Joe Floor, on the campus of the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And this ministry was to the gay community. And it changed me. It really impacted me. And to be there, and I asked them, I was struggling. I said, do you think gay people are born that way, or do they choose? They said they're born that way. No one would choose all the discrimination and persecution. And by the time I left that ministry, I was changing. I think that happens in the church all the time. But again, it takes time to, and again, it's based on love. If you love people, they will listen to you. When you bury someone's mother or father, and you do it in a compassionate manner, when you help their children and you talk to their children over the decades, they begin to listen in a different way because they know that you're legitimate and you're just genuine. Of course, you're going to make mistakes. Oh my Lord, oftentimes I'm at the age now where every time I think about a positive thing I've done to say it, I think about a negative thing I've done to say it too. But people, I think, do come to church because they have a desire to be closer to God. And again, I think the challenge is to help people on that journey, help them to understand that we should not be the same person this year that we were 5 years ago. We all should be at a different place or a better understanding, and that we don't ever stop along this journey until the journey is over and we go to be with Jesus. But I mean, the church itself as an institution, for all of its baggage, I think also has a lot of good things that happen. Part of that is the transformation of people's minds. I met people as I traveled around the country. They come to me. I mean, I'm talking about seniors who came to me and said, I've never thought about this whole advocacy thing, but I'm at a point now where I'm ready. And I think that God's calling me to become more engaged in social justice advocacy. So by the time I leave today, I'll get back with you. I have specifics, but I like stories as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
One of the things, it's sort of a textual, but also a social question. Matthew 25, the phrase "the least of these" always kind of irks me a little bit, because I think one of the big critiques of charity is as long as we keep them the least of these, we can keep giving. So I wonder what you're saying with charity and advocacy, if maybe that's a way to get past my just trickling at that phrase. But I just wonder if you have any advice for small churches that are trying to do more advocacy, but on a small scale that doesn't keep reproducing this. They're them, they're the least of these, they're the ones that need charity.
Yeah.
But it's a transformation.
And that's a difficult one, to be honest with you, because again, we oftentimes explain the need for charity without really breaking it down. And like you're saying, well, we're not doing things for people, we're doing things with people. We're growing as much as we are, as they are, because people, we love doing things for people. You know, we like the fact that we're in control. We can bring something over here. And I'm going to tell one more story about my own personal experience when I pastored in public. And I do not, is this online? I'm going to tell it anyway. The deacons would feed people 4 times a year in the homeless shelter. And the more I learned about it, the more disturbed I got. I estimated that, and they shared with us, they said, well, it costs us about $4,000 per meal to do one meal. And so by the end of my tenure there, I told them, I had a meeting with the deacons, I said, this is not a good solution. I said, for $16,000 a year, you could put up a family in a hotel or somewhere. And they, oh my God, pushed back so hard. And they literally told me, I never forget this, it makes me feel so good when I feed people. So with that understanding, we have to continue to try to talk to people. So let's examine fully why you feed people. Again, this the chaplain said this morning, we got to examine our motives, why we do it. And it is oftentimes, and when it is from a selfish motive to feel good, we have to say that's not why we're called to do this. And we have to have a level of engagement where we don't look down on people, that these are people who need our help. And then, for example, oftentimes you notice that when we depend, even in the Christian church, our catalog of giving, oftentimes the recipients are people of color. You know, and it breeds that type of understanding where every time I see someone who's poor, someone who's African, Black, Hispanic, but there are more white poor people in this country than there are people of color who are impoverished. And so all around us, we have to combat this. But I do think we have to have a candid conversation. So, you know, the reason why we do things is because we are called as children of God to love. And if someone else's heart is breaking because of poverty, then our heart is breaking as well. And we want to engage with them in opportunity. So again, I would use the Bible. You know, Jesus was asked in John 9 about the blind. They asked the disciples, says, the Bible said, born blind. Did he sin or did his parents sin? And Jesus said, neither, but in order that the works of God might be made manifest in him. And Jesus did a wonderful thing. He healed the world and embraced him. And at the end, had a conversation with him after all of the religious people, the leaders of the synagogue, cast him out of the synagogue. And so we have this opportunity wherein, and that's one of the benefits of the church, is that we can have these long-term conversations where we have to be very intentional with where we're going from the beginning, but do it in a deceitful, a very insightful and caring way. You know, pastoral way. And so, but I do think we have to challenge them and talk about it, preach about it. But one of the ways we have to do it again is in a very deliberate, long-term. Because again, to change someone's mind with things that it's not going to happen overnight. And I think book clubs are one opportunity. You can look at some of the writers who have talked about this. Because there are thousands of books out there that talk about what is legitimate ministry, what's the legitimate role of charity. Because again, I'm in support of charity because I still remember that with the storm, a guy stopped by the church. He had about a foot of snow. He said, "I need somewhere to go." Now, I can't say to this guy, go out and just wait. I'm going down to city council tomorrow, try to open up the homeless shelter. So we have to have a stance. But again, what we have done in the life of the church is that we're outweighing charities up here, our advocacy is down here, it's an afterthought almost. And really, we also have to combat this understanding of church and state. People don't understand what it means separation of church and state. They think it means complete separation, but it means that one can't dictate to the other. That the state can't tell you what to believe or not to believe. We can't dictate to politicians. We don't govern the country, but we can be engaged. We have a right to talk to your legislators. And so we have to re-educate a lot of people, even Presbyterians. And the sad part is that it's worse in other groups, I'll be honest with you. You mentioned evangelicals today. It's an interesting mix of theologies that we have. I heard a legislator say once, he said, well, I'm against raising SNAP benefits, food stamp benefits, because the Bible says that if a man does not work, he shall not eat. He quoted that as his justification. I'll never forget that. It bothered me so much because it's a misuse of scripture. And people will pull out one verse to support their position, but ignore the totality of scripture. Say, and they won't say a word about Jesus, the teachings of Christ, because Jesus condemned the rich man, and Lazarus and the rich man and the old rich fool. So we have an understanding in this country that's still the Judaic, old Judaic, and no understanding in parts of the Old Testament and in the wisdom of the truth that those who are rich are blessed by God, and those who are poor are cursed by God for their sinfulness. And it's still part of our theological beliefs in this country. You hear it from people every day. And so we have to challenge that and be consistently challenged. And I say, keep nudging. Keep nudging. Don't stop, because pastors get frustrated. They really do. They stay at a church. They're doing everything they can. They're trying to set an example. People don't seem to be nudged. But people are listening. I'm convinced that there are people out there who are hearing. Oftentimes, they won't say a word. They'll see you in the midst of a fight and they agree with your position. They'll just sit there and won't say anything. But there are more people out there, I think, who agree with us.
Howard Boswell from Buena Vista Presbyterian Church. I'm encountering a specific issue, and I'm wondering how to open a conversation up. Problem is that over the last year, and maybe all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic, I have received several requests for assistance with hotel stays, motel stays, of people who are kind of caught betwixt in between various situations. And sometimes they ended up kicked out of their house for whatever reason, despite what the CDC suggested you can not do what they suggest. And I found out that in the city I live in or work in, there's an ordinance against any kind of homeless shelter. They do it, they don't say it that directly because you don't want to do that, but they have an ordinance against more than 4 people not related to each other in a dwelling.
Wow.
Yeah. And so and it means, for instance, the nearest shelter is in Stanton, about 45 minutes more. So I'm wondering, how would I go about opening that conversation? Because it involves the council, city council, and also I live in it's a weird situation. I am in a minority. I don't mean color or anything. I mean Protestants are in the minority. The majority of the town is LDS. Yet they want to. So I'm wondering, how do you negotiate that kind of situation?
And the question for those online was when there's a city ordinance against establishing a homeless shelter and the rebelling attitude is in support of that ordinance in this region? I don't know. Well, first you gotta run for city council. City council. I do think, you're gonna have to find a way to get that changed by influencing the people who make that decision. And that can be through public pressure. That also can be one of the things that I would do immediately is try to identify what are the resources for people who are in need of assistance as far as someone is stable. I think that's another piece that we can do at the church is that when people come to us, we don't have the ability to impact their situation, but we can send them somewhere else that they can go. Because again, we've got the long-term need of changing the ordinance, and then you have the short-term need of immediate help at that moment. So obviously, I think finding resources that are there. You're about to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing that I think is kind of amazing about it. This is the first church where I've experienced it. They have someone other than the pastor making those kind of calls.
Those kind of talks.
Yeah, he talks with them. They call me, and then I say I have to call. I don't give the name because I don't.
So you have to call someone else in the congregation to do advocacy or urge advocacy.
She distributes the funds. And the reason why this has become an issue for me is because the last time we helped somebody, she just said, this isn't working.
So she resisted helping someone.
Well, she didn't resist helping somebody, but she said, we keep getting this same conversation. And the social service agency in Rockbridge County can't, they only have certain limited amounts that they can give. And it was like, wow. And she's like, I would say she's probably in her 80s or 90s. So it's like a light bulb for her. And I'm like, yeah.
Got an advocate.
Let me be sure. So she is an advocate for your position?
I think so.
Okay, yeah. But I found it interesting. The first thing you said was that there's one person who's designated in the church to make all the announcements for these type of issues.
Right.
Okay.
To handle the call.
Don't you just love the church?
I know.
The church is so interesting. And again, I'm not going to pretend that I have an answer that's going to resolve that issue. But I would definitely make use of the advocates in that conversation and give them a stronger voice. And again, my urging is to continue to push, keep pushing, gentle, but and there are sometimes we have to push harder than others. Don't get discouraged, but again, I think obviously one of the goals is to change that ordinance. And again, that's depending on the makeup of the city council, but also to be engaged in resources in the community.
Well, we were having a side conversation over here about the fact that we might need to find out the history of why this happened in the way it did, but also knowing this person sitting behind me, knowing that he happens to be president of the Ministerial Association, so I know he can nudge in that area too. So there's more that way too.
Yes.
That I think exactly what you're saying. Just start broaching it very, and see where it goes in that way, and then keep at it.
Yeah.
But I think knowing the history is really
Yeah.
critical, because you can show what has changed. If it started 100 years ago and it was because there was this unusual migration of grafters or something, some other miscreant, and that's why they put it in policy. And those aren't around anymore, but what you're having are, your people, your community who are, in-house problem. Then you can say, and this is why it was. We can change this.
Yes. Yeah. And
I think that's true for laws too. I mean, in terms of, you talk about advocacy for laws. A lot of the reason why we do what we do, whether it's in Congress or community,
Or the book of order.
It's just like your grandmother used to whack off a heck of a hand because the hand wasn't big enough. But you're still doing it 2 generations later because that's what grandma did. If you look to see why rules were created and then can pull out, okay, what's changed? Then you have a different approach to advocacy.
And again, the guidance is to know the history of why the laws came to being Therefore, you can talk about how times have changed and things have changed over the years.
Yeah, I think those laws came, you have a college in town, right?
Yes, I was thinking about that. We have Southern Virginia.
Yeah, so Williamsburg, we think Williamsburg has the same set of rules to keep college kids from overtaking a house. You know, 12 kids all live in but yet Williamsburg has shelter. So
It's a day shelter.
well, but Harrisonburg has a shelter too, and university, obviously. Okay, so there are ways, I have to tell you, I don't know what they are. But there is,
Well, we got some ideas.
Yeah, so again, you were saying that college students,
I think that's where they come from.
that's interesting, so they didn't like college students. Or college students, where they feel like they were misusing,
Well, you can have 4 in a house, okay, but you can have 6 or 8.
what's the fun of being a college student? You know?
There is that.
I wonder if what we would want to provide is more of a home rather than a shelter. And you could be creative in using that particular policy. And I mean, I've had a member that had said, you know, wouldn't it be great if in the field out at Westminster, we had tiny homes? And I love that vision. That vision hasn't gone more than a vision of just providing someone a home. And you can still be able to abide by the policy and provide what families really want. And when you see some of that in our community, the shelter, because of COVID, has been at a local motel. And they have had, you know, individual rooms for now almost over a year. And to be able to have your own individual space, as we know is very important, have, you know, meals provided, but a refrigerator, a shower, and then be able to not provide just food, but to provide the first 6 months of a deposit. Because I remember a gentleman when I would work in Charlotte, he said, you know, I gained 5 pounds when I was homeless. I need someone to put the deposit on my apartment so that I can have a home. And so that speaks to what you are saying too, of, you know, where is the funds and where is our energy? We want to be creative and provide people what we are enjoying ourselves. And I think it's a home.
Yeah, so providing them homes, obviously, is the ultimate goal. People want to be in a home and deserve to be in a home. I do think we need to look at also, you know, just a wide array of options that we have, because again, rarely does change come immediately. As you say, some of the things that we want to do are visions and, you know, they're long term. One of the ministries I experienced in Martinsville that I really would love to establish was an organization called Safety Net. And it was started by a woman from the community who was a millionaire. She had lots of money. She wanted to do some good. So what she would do is that they would accept applications, oftentimes through local nonprofits, of individuals who needed the first 6 months of their rent payment, or who needed a down payment on a house, or would buy them cars. I mean, she had money. So there was opportunities like that, because again, we find that when we study homelessness, a disproportionate percentage of individuals are not permanently homeless. You know, there are people who have lost a job and they're thrown cast into homelessness. So they need a safety net, something to help them to get over that difficulty. So one of the things I'm trying to say is, let's look at a wide array of resources. There's nothing that's going to work within every context. But I will say, we do have to be very persistent in raising our voices to challenge some of these traditional ways of doing things that people don't want to change. But that's how change comes. And this is our way of encouraging you to do advocacy. Justice advocacy produces change very slowly. I've never had a meeting with a member of Congress where they said, oh, I never thought about that. You know, all of a sudden everything's different. But when change comes, it's this whole, you know, the president's been talking about $15 an hour. That debate has been going on for a decade. He made in social justice advocacy have been pushing this. So when the change comes, it will be life changing. But again, you cannot do justice advocacy if you want to see it change. You know, just over a year or two. And also, I would say a bit of advice I can focus. manage your priorities. Don't try to do everything. You can't do everything, especially with a local congregation. I had a congregation come, a good friend of mine. He said, well, we have 5 justice priorities for the year. I said, you need to have 1 justice priority over 5 years, you know, and because it again, you overwhelm yourself. I mean, we want to deal with homelessness, we want to deal with trafficking, we want to deal with poverty, we want to deal with discrimination. Examine what's going on in your local. What are the needs that really need to be addressed? And then also, compare that with where's your passion? What really keeps you up at night? Because you're going to get energy from that. Our son got meningitis when he was 9 months old, and it was severe. I mean, he had seizures. He had 2 seizures. He had a stroke. He stayed in intensive care for a week. We had to take him to a rehab center in the hospital. Hurricane Katrina, I was in the hospital with him for a month. That's how I remember. But I also remember that my wife worked for a pharmaceutical company. She was with United Healthcare. It was excellent. I mean, it was just tremendously grateful. And I had North Carolina Blue Cross Blue Shield with PCUSA. And so we were looking at the bills, and the bills had accumulated to $300,000. We wound up paying $3,000 of that total amount. And that's when we stopped looking and said, okay, we won't really look at it anymore. That's what's going on. But it put a passion in for healthcare. Everyone should have that same opportunity, and especially when we know that in this country, the primary cause of bankruptcy is still medical bills. And people lose everything because they still can't pay the medical bills. And then the thing about there are some legislators who want to get rid of the ban on pre-existing conditions. And so that's a passion of mine. That's something that when someone comes to me and says, I need for you to say something about this or be at a press conference, I go. Because it means something to me personally. So I say, examine the needs in your local community and compare those to what's your passion. And that again will help you to keep on in the long run. I do think you got to have a lot of energy for this. But also recognize the triumphs that when you talk to someone and they really say, I'm with you on this. Work together and celebrate that. So, all right.
Jimmie, we've got 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Ask us to pray us for meal, lunch is ready, down at the hotel as well. So if you pray, a blessing over the program.
Okay, we'd love to. And we gather back at 1:15. Now you should know. 1:15. Okay. I just want to throw that out. Let us gather together. Most gracious God, we are indeed grateful. For you love us without hesitation. You love us despite the fact that there are times when we are unworthy of your love. We are disobedient. Times when we don't listen and heed your voice. And yet your love is unconditional. And all that you require is that we love you, that we love others, that we dare to love ourselves. We give you thanks for this conversation, oh God, and for this opportunity to break bread together. For the hands that have labored in order that we might be fed. For the hands that grew the food and picked the food and harvested the food, put it in a supermarket. And for those who have done so many hours of labor in order that we might have this one, we pray that you bless them. Bless those who are working hard in fields with just pay and fair treatment. Bless those who are working in supermarkets and groceries and who are out in open field markets, that they might indeed reap enough benefit from their labor to support their families. Continue to plant a seed of sensitivity and seeing those who others do not see. Bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies, not only for citizens within this country, God, but bless those who are around. For there is so much hunger, so much unnecessary hunger. We pray that you bless our leaders to be compassionate, to be caring, to be people, men and women of faith, who make decisions that benefit the global community. In Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen.